Welcome to Tales of Abuse. I'm your host, ClericofMadness, the founder of the Creepypasta Wiki. Tales of Abuse is a show where I look at the Wiki's abuse filter log to bring you stories lost to the filter and offer insight as to why the filters are there, as well as potential ways to better such stories. All content posted to the Wiki is CC BY-SA, though since linking is not an option, I will be offering critique and commentary such that the readings can be considered fair use. This is not a show for belittling or humiliating authors, just a show to help people learn and improve. Today's story is Willow the Killer by Willow the Killer. Willow had many disorders leading to bullying and resulting in homeschool. Her older brother Alex tells her all about school and what he does. She is always happy when she spends time with him, but sometimes Alex has to save Willow from their father because he's usually lost in drinking and hits Willow, resulting in bruises or cuts, but she got used to it but bleeds a lot. Alex and Willow usually go into the woods and go to their favorite spot, the lake, and they skip stones, but one day Willow, Alex, and their father were going out to dinner. Their mom was at work, so it was just them. Their dad was drinking and crashed the car, almost killing Willow and himself. Willow looked at Alex, who was in front of Willow with glass shards on his face and a branch through his chest, because the highway was near the woods. Willow started crying and screamed, "Alex, please, please don't be dead." But he was dead. Alex saved Willow's life, and her father staring at his dead son and Willow crying. 5 days after the crash, Willow wouldn't eat or drink anything, and she would cry herself to sleep, and she almost died from hunger and thirst. One day she came out of her room with a big smile on her face. Her mother was out shopping, and leaving her with her father, he was asleep on the couch. She went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife and stabbed her father to death. Her mother came home and found her daughter covered in blood with a big smile on her face, with her husband dead. Willow stared at her mom. She had a phone in her hand dialing 911. Willow heard someone on the other end of the line and jumped on her mother. Willow stabbed her mother in the shoulder, and Mabel giving of a deafening scream. The operator on the other end of the line was like, "Ma'am? Ma'am?" Willow ended the call, going to stab her mother. Mabel grabbed her pocket knife, stabbing Willow in the cheek, cutting a medium-sized hole in her cheek. Mabel forgot about her daughter's one disability and tried to run. Willow touched her cheek and felt her teeth. Her fingers were covered in blood. She stared at Mabel, trying to run, and jumped on her, stabbing her in the head. Willow got up and ran out of the house, grabbing matches, and she threw a match at the house that easily lit up in flames because it was made of wood. But there was a gasoline tank that had spilled and made a circle of fire around Willow. She heard sirens. What were the police? She was going to accept her fate, being arrested or burning to death. Willow stared, blacking out from smoke, and fainted. But then she woke up in the woods, no memory of anything. She only remembered the fire. She found a mask and her knife and matches. She picked up the mask and put it on, putting the knife and matches in her pocket. She stared, walking through the woods, and found an abandoned-looking mansion and met the others. 1 year has passed it, and she went back to her old house, maybe thinking she could remember something, and found an old photo that was smashed. She didn't recognize anyone in the photo but herself and her brother. She also lives with the creepypastas.
So, this is your average X the Killer story. You have the abuse of the main character, be it bullying, physical abuse, or sexual abuse, though that is only often used in a large percentage of the female the Killer story variants. In this story, as is typical, the main character suffers a traumatic experience, here the death of her brother, and suddenly emerges as a murderer, in this case from her room after nearly dying from not eating or drinking for days. Then, after the patricide that typifies these kinds of stories, comes the fire. For some reason, along with killing bullies and or parents, the main character in some way encounters fire as part of their origin story. Here, a thrown match easily ignites the main character's house, though that is not how matches work nowadays. They are almost all safety matches that no longer work like they did in the days of Hollywood noir films, able to strike on the flick of a thumbnail. The story ends with a common theme for OC the Killer stories. The main character goes to live in that supposed mansion in the woods location, presumably the Slender Man mansion. So, here's the deal, and I'm going to be straight on this one. These stories are power fantasies for the author. I have said in the past that I believe the reason that Jeff the Killer is so popular is because it introduces a scenario in which a bullied every boy character triumphs over his tormentors and gains power over them and adults alike. Every The Killer story seems to follow this template. I honestly worry, having passed over many similar stories in the abuse log to bring something that didn't have explicit sexual abuse of a female character. If these stories are some kind of escape, we as a community need to have a serious discussion on whether or not these kinds of fantasies are healthy escapism, or whether they will lead to a third or fourth Slenderman stabbing incident based on their OC's murderous rampages on foes and family. Furthering my concern is the mention, in this story and others, of the main character killing their family and going to live in what I strongly believe is supposed to be the Slenderman mansion. There was an about section for the OC character, Willow, that I didn't read, as it wasn't part of the main story. It listed her likes, dislikes, and friends, of which many icon pasta were named, including, but not limited to, Slenderman, Jane, Jeff, Ben, Lost Silver, and the Proxies. Let me be crystal clear, listeners. There is no mythical mansion in any woods that houses whatever creepypasta pals these people think it does. Creepypasta was originally more akin to internet campfire stories. Characters like Slenderman and Jeff the Killer were written by someone. They are not real. Do not go about harming people in an attempt to curry favor for imaginary entities. Do not kill or harm people because you think it will lead you to some mansion where you can live among actual murderers and monsters. This is magical thinking, and it is about as unhealthy as you can get, frankly. It's one thing to write about murder and monsters so long as you don't become one yourself. I do not want to have to wake up to another stabbing in the name of a character someone wrote ever again. Escapism is one thing. Fantasizing is a step further, and taking action upon the two is a step too far. Please, do not hurt anyone for the sake of imaginary creatures in the hopes that your life will be in some way better. If there is abuse in your life, please report it. Harm that begets harm only invites further harm. Break the cycle of abuse. Now, with that important tangent out of the way, it's time to talk about how I would go about writing some kind of the killer story. The first thing that usually drags down these kinds of stories is that the author bases the main character on themselves, either naming them after themselves or having their username be the same as the title of the story. For this to work, I wouldn't want to base this character on myself directly. Sorry, folks. This means no story about a man who goes insane from reading creepypasta for the last almost decade. Yet. Another major failure of these stories is to focus on mental abuse as a catalyst for the transformation of the main character, but then does not usually give more than a paragraph of insight into the abuse, if that. Personally, if I was going to use mental health as a reason for the slide into murderous insanity, I would research serial killers for insight on their history and what effects their childhood had on their career as a murderer. That means developing a character with a defined background and history rather than backloading the context in a few throwaway sentences that force the story to run at a breakneck pace as the main character goes from bullied child to mask-wearing homicidal maniac. That being said, I would go about writing this OC the Killer story in one of two ways. The first way I would set about it would be as I have said, a slow boil that gives way into measured insanity. Perhaps the character's parents never noticed his isolation, or what he did with it. Maybe he tortured animals as a way of working up to humans. A dead toad here and there wouldn't raise any questions, but as he worked his way up to larger prey, the neighborhood takes notice. Maybe someone who comes accusing him touches the wrong nerve, and now he has a dead body on his hands and a newfound thrill for killing, and a desire to remain uncaught. The second method I would use for writing this kind of story would be to shy away from using mental illness in any way. The main character would either seek out or be found by a dark, power-granting entity that would bestow upon him some kind of especially angsty powers. This pact with the devil, as it may very well be, would result in him losing his parents, and now, adrift and aimless in the world, he kills to find purpose in an uncaring, indifferent world that only seeks to catch him to exact their own revenge, a revenge he sought for humanity out of probable boredom one day. Alternatively, as I think about it, a third option presents itself to me that would combine the two. The character would believe he has gained supernatural powers, but this is actually just magical thinking brought on by his delusions of grandeur. He fancies himself a murderer, but never actually kills anyone. Perhaps, even, there is a better and bigger twist yet to be used with that premise that I will hold on to for a future story. Anyway, That's why we don't allow yet another kind of cookie-cutter subgenre of creepypasta on the wiki. Too often they are the same product, different wrapper. What do you think? Will you use any of the ideas I have shared, or do you think you have plans for writing a The Killer story now that I've got you thinking about it? Let me know in the comments below. I'd be really interested to hear what you think. And, as always, this has been Tales of Abuse, and I have been Cleric of Madness.